Braden Hartwell's hand crushed the front of Lena Cruz's throat and drove her into cinder blocks so hard the back of her skull thudded against paint and concrete, her boot heels scraping for traction that never came. Air narrowed to a pinhole. Sound went metallic. The service corridor under the Hartwell Livestock Pavilion smelled like bleach, fryer oil, wet hay, and the sweet chemical burn of machine coolant from the refrigeration line. Lena tried to wedge 2 fingers between his wrist and her windpipe, but Braden was taller, stronger, and drunk on the kind of confidence that came from never being corrected in public. His thumb dug under her jaw. Her vision stippled at the edges. Purple crept in. "Say it," he hissed, face close enough that she caught mint gum and whiskey on his breath. "Say she ran off." Lena couldn't answer. Oxygen was now math. 1 breath delayed, 1 second lost. Her right shoulder slammed the wall again as he adjusted his grip, and pain shot down her arm in a clean, bright line. She heard her own pulse in her ears, fast and heavy, like boots on hollow steel. "Say it," he said again. "The missing girl ran. You saw nothing else?" Mia Alvarez's face flashed across Lena's mind in a hard, clear frame. Brown braid coming loose under a county fair cap, ticket strips looped around her wrist, ink smudge on her thumb from counting cash too fast. 14 years old, smart eyes, too serious for her age. Then the memory shifted to less than 30 minutes earlier. Loading dock light, a wheeled crate, a limp sneaker toe, and Braden's hand on the handle while he told her to mind her own job. She had said no. Now his fingers tightened. 32 people stood within 20 feet. Fair workers in branded polos, teen volunteers in yellow vests, 1 deputy moonlighting crowd control, 2 janitors with mops still in hand, a pair of livestock handlers, 3 ride techs, and kids from concessions with aprons stained red from syrup. 6 held phones up at chest or eye level and recorded, screens glowing pale in the corridor's fluorescent hum. 1 young volunteer started crying without making a sound. No one stepped forward. Nobody helped. The concessions manager, Dale Wyrick, did the worst thing Lena had ever seen a decent man do. He turned his whole body toward the humming soda freezer like the inventory sheet taped to the door had become urgent scripture, like counting cola cans could erase the shape of Braden's hand around her throat. He kept his eyes on a line of numbers and never once looked back. Lena's knees buckled and kicked back straight on instinct. Braden laughed through his teeth, the sound small and ugly. He wore a black designer jacket that still had a price-stiff fold at the cuff, and white sneakers so clean they looked untouched by dirt, though they stood on concrete tracked with mud and manure. His $400 sunglasses hung from his collar on a gold clip, bouncing each time he jerked her against the wall. "My father's name is on this building," he said. "You don't get to rewrite this." She clawed at him again. Her nails dragged skin. He didn't flinch. At the far end of the corridor, Ghost stopped walking. The old German shepherd had been moving at Reed Thompson's knee, head low, gait slightly uneven from the left hip, that had never fully forgiven Kandahar. Then his ears pinned forward, his body locked. The tan and black saddleback that turned gold in sunlight and dark as iron in shadow looked almost black under the fluorescent strip lights. A growl started in his chest, low and rolling, the sound of distant thunder trapped in a steel tunnel. Reed's hand tightened on the leash before his eyes found the chokehold. Ghost had seen it first. Lena heard claws click once against concrete. Then silence again, thick and mean. The corridor held its breath with her. She tried to pull 1 full inhale and got only a ragged half. Spots burst at the edges of her vision, like camera flash. She tasted copper and panic. Braden leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper made for humiliation. "You're going to tell the deputies she got scared and bolted. You're going to tell them she talked about leaving home. You're going to tell them anything I say." He shook her once for punctuation. Her head snapped back into the wall. The impact made a sharp sound that bounced between the cinder block and steel doors. One of the teens filming winced and adjusted focus instead of lowering his phone. Nobody moved. "Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from, and stay with this story to the end. If you believe vulnerable people should not have to wait for permission to be defended, subscribe, because what happened under this county fairground did not stay under it." Lena's airway narrowed further. Her fingers were weak now, slipping off his wrist as if her own hands had stopped belonging to her. She could hear the soda freezer compressors cycle on, then off. Somewhere above them, a ride brake squealed and children screamed with the clean joy of not knowing what was happening one level below their feet. Braden looked over his shoulder at the watchers, performing for them. "Everybody heard me," he said. "Mia ran. That's the story." A livestock handler in a feed cap glanced at the deputy, waiting for instruction that never came. The deputy stared at the floor drain as if rust stains required legal review. Two ride techs took a synchronized step back toward a fire door. One volunteer whispered, "Please stop." So quietly the words died in her mask. Lena felt her pulse begin to stagger. The world tunneled hard. She thought of Mia's last text, shown to her by another ticket kid with shaking hands. "I found where they take them." No emoji, no punctuation, no second line. Braden squeezed again. "Repeat it." At the corridor entrance, Reed stepped into full light. He wore worn NWU Type 3 camouflage-like armor he had never taken off, sleeves rolled with exactness, boots old but maintained, beard trimmed close around a jaw marked by a pale scar that cut from ear toward chin. Broad shoulders, quiet hands, stillness that made other people aware of their own movement. He took one look, and in that look measured exits, distances, who would freeze, who might run, where to place force, how long Lena had. Ghost stayed at his left leg, rigid, growl deepening. Braden finally saw them and gave a brief, dismissive snort, the way men like him acknowledged workers who weren't useful. He had no idea who Reed was. He had no idea what Ghost had done before retirement. He had no idea what quality of calm had just entered the corridor. He kept his hand on Lena's throat. Reed moved one step closer and stopped, angled slightly, giving Ghost line and room without needing to look down. The leash stayed loose. His voice came out low, level, and stripped to command. "Let her go." Braden smirked because entitlement had always sounded louder to him than warning. "My father owns this county," he said, tightening his fingers one last notch, speaking to Reed while watching the crowd. "Your security. Stay in your lane." He should have read the room then. He should have noticed that 6 phones were still up, but now pointed at him, not Lena. He should have noticed Dale Wyrick had turned away from the soda freezer and looked scared for the first time all night. He should have noticed the deputy quietly taking one step toward the wall, creating distance from Braden instead of backing him. He should have noticed Ghost's weight shift forward, claws set, chest full of thunder. He noticed none of it. The corridor held 32 witnesses, and for the first time since Lena's boots left steady ground, every one of them understood the balance had changed. Then Ghost moved. Not a leap, not a wild charge. He slid one step forward and angled his body between Braden's knees and Lena's collapsing weight, ears pinned, shoulders squared, his growl rising from warning to promise. The sound filled the concrete corridor and seemed to shake dust out of the overhead pipes. Braden's grip hitched for half a second, just enough for Lena to drag in a narrow, tearing breath that burned like fire going down. Reed did not rush him. Men like Braden mistook speed for panic, and panic for weakness. Reed stayed planted, one hand light on the leash, the other open at his side, his eyes fixed on the exact tendon in Braden's forearm that was still crushing Lena's airway. The fluorescent lights turned the scar on Reed's jaw into a white line. His voice came again, low and flat. "Last warning." Braden laughed, but the laugh came out thin. "You think a dog scares me?" he said, tightening his fingers as if he needed to prove the room still belonged to him. "You're both done here?" Lena heard the words as if through water. Her vision narrowed, then pulsed wide again. She felt cinder block grit against the back of her neck, felt the tremor in her own hands, felt the exact point where her pulse beat against Braden's palm. She could not swallow. She could not speak. She could only stare at Ghost's shoulders, the old dog's tan and black coat, dark as iron under the harsh lights, and watch the discipline in him. He did not bite. He did not break command. He waited for permission that had not yet come. That discipline scared Braden more than teeth would have. One of the teens filming whispered, "Oh, God," and lowered his phone without realizing it. Another raised hers higher, hands shaking so hard the image blurred. Dale Wyrick took 2 steps backward from the soda freezer and bumped a mop bucket, sending gray water across the concrete in a slow, ugly wave. The deputy against the wall shifted his weight to the balls of his feet, not to help Braden, but to avoid standing within arm's reach when Braden fell. The room understood before Braden did. Reed's gaze flicked once to Lena's face, purple at the lips, eyes glassing. Time measured in seconds now, not arguments. His insomnia had taught him to hear clocks in everything. In HVAC cycles, in a radio static, in the change of someone's breathing before they passed out. He heard Lena's breath break on the edge of silence and made the decision. Ghost. Guard. Ghost drove in low, shoulder first, hammering Braden's shin with 80 pounds of trained force. Not enough to shatter bone, enough to steal balance. Braden cursed and lurched sideways, his fingers finally peeling off Lena's throat as he grabbed for the wall. Lena dropped to one knee, coughing dry and hard, one hand clamped over the front of her neck as air came back in ragged strips. Braden swung at Ghost with the back of his arm, sloppy and furious. Reed stepped once, caught the wrist in mid-arc and turned it down and outward with a movement so tight it looked almost gentle, until Braden hit the cinder block with a sound that snapped every head in the corridor toward them. Reed did not strike him. He pinned him, forearm across shoulder blades, wrist controlled, hips anchored. Braden's designer jacket scraped along wet concrete and bleach residue. "Face down," Reed said. "Get off me," Braden shouted, voice cracking now. "You touch me, you lose your job. You lose everything. Face down." Braden fought the hold with the frantic strength of someone who had never been held accountable by a stronger man. He kicked once, heels skidding in mop water. Ghost snapped forward with a bark that echoed off steel doors and stopped the kick in place. Lena stayed on one knee, coughing and pulling air, tears streaming from the pressure damage in her throat more than fear. She watched Reed's hands, the calm in them, and remembered Mia's text. "I found where they take them." She felt that line in her chest like a second heartbeat. The corridor had gone silent except for Braden's breathing and the hum of coolant lines above them. Then the narrator in this story did what cowards hate most, asked witnesses to become a community instead of a crowd. Before we go 1 inch further, tell us where you're watching from and stay to the end. If you believe people like Lena and girls like Mia should not have to negotiate for the right to breathe, subscribe and stand with this all the way through, because what happened in this hallway was the crack that split Cedar Falls open. Braden turned his head against the floor enough to spit words over his shoulder. "My father owns this county," he said louder now, using the line like a life raft. "The sheriff reports to us. The fair board reports to us. You're dead here. He did not know that 6 cameras had already captured the chokehold, the threat, and Reed's warning. He did not know the teen in the yellow vest nearest the fire door had quietly started a live stream the moment Lena's heels left traction. He did not know the deputy by the wall had just seen the comments flood in from people outside the corridor asking why nobody was stopping Hartwell's son. He had no idea his power was now evidence. Lena got one hand on the wall and pushed herself upright in stages. Her airways screamed in protest. Every swallow felt like glass. Reed glanced at her once, saw her standing, and returned his focus to Braden without shifting his hold. Ghost stayed between Braden and Lena, body rigid, muzzle inches from Braden's shoulder, growl low and continuous like an engine idling at red line. "Lena," Reed said, eyes still on Braden. "Can you talk?" She tried. No sound. She coughed, bent forward, then forced 2 words through damaged tissue. "Loading dock." Braden jerked under Reed's weight. "Shut up." Reed tightened the pin exactly 1 degree. Braden's chest flattened to concrete. "What about it?" Reed asked. Lena swallowed, winced, and pointed with shaking fingers toward the steel service door marked "Quarantine Authorized Staff Only." "He had her," she whispered. "Cart. Sedated. She was there." The words landed in the room like dropped metal. A ride tech muttered a curse. One of the janitors backed into the wall and stared at Braden, as if seeing him for the first time. Dale Wyrick looked from Lena to the quarantine door and closed his eyes for a second. A man measuring the weight of every quiet compromise he had made in exchange for keeping his paycheck. Braden bared his teeth and twisted again. "She's lying." Lena touched her throat and held up her palm. Purple bruising had already begun to flower where his fingers had been. "You did this," she said, voice breaking but clear enough now to carry. "You told me to say Mia ran." Nobody looked away this time. Reed nodded once toward the deputy. "Call it in." The deputy hesitated. His radio stayed clipped to his shoulder, untouched. "Need supervisor authorization," he said, eyes darting toward Braden's face, then the Hartwell logo on the wall placard. "Protocol." "Protocol?" Dale Wyrick said, voice raw with sudden anger at himself. "You just watched him choke her." The deputy's jaw worked. "I said I need—" Ghost's ears snapped toward the quarantine door. His entire body changed. Hackles rose in a dark ridge along his back. He broke the guard position, turned hard, and pulled toward the door with such force the leash line sang through Reed's glove. He barked once, then twice. Not aggression. Alert. Reed saw it instantly. The same alert pattern Ghost had given in Kandahar for concealed humans behind false walls. Ears forward, body locked, weight driving at source. "Contact," Reed said. Braden froze under him. Ghost clawed at the bottom seam of the quarantine door, nails scraping paint to bare metal. He shoved his nose into the 2-inch gap at the threshold and whined, high and sharp, then barked again, rapid now, urgent. The smell hit Lena a second later as the door shuddered in its frame, antiseptic, diesel fumes, and something cold and medicinal drifting from beyond. Lena's knees nearly gave out again. "That smell," she whispered, "from the dock." Reed handed Braden's pinned wrist to the nearest ride tech, a thick-armed man who had finally found his spine. "Hold him. If he moves, shout." The ride tech swallowed and nodded, planting his knee near Braden's shoulder. "You can't touch that door," Braden shouted, panic finally breaking through entitlement. "Private property. Biohazard restricted." Reed looked at the deputy. "Either you open it, or you explain on camera why you refused while a missing 14-year-old may be inside." The deputy stared at Ghost clawing and barking at the threshold, then at the 6 phones still recording, then at Braden's face pressed to wet concrete. He reached for his radio with one hand and his key ring with the other. "Dispatch," he said into the mic, voice suddenly formal. "Possible live abduction link at Hartwell Livestock Sublevel, Quarantine Annex Access Point, requesting immediate medical, supervisory, and state notification." Braden shouted a name into the floor. "Call my father." No one moved to help him. By the time the deputy's key hit the lock, the corridor had stopped being Hartwell territory and started being a crime scene. Lena stood with one hand on her bruised throat and the other on the wall, breathing through pain and watching ghosts quiver at the seam like a compass needle fixed on true north. Reed took the leash in both hands, gave the old dog one steadying touch between the shoulders, and waited for the latch to turn, because what was on the other side of that steel door was about to decide who in Cedar Falls had been lying for years and who had been too afraid to say it out loud. The deputy's key teeth touched the lock, metal about to give, and then the moment held long enough for memory to break in like floodwater. Now let's go back to the beginning. Mia Alvarez was 14 and already moved through mornings like someone twice her age. She woke at 5:10 in the duplex on Alder Street, set oatmeal on low heat before her mother's second alarm, and lined up her little brother's insulin kit on the kitchen table in exact order. Alcohol swab, lancet, strip, pen, cap. The refrigerator hummed too loud and froze lettuce at the back, but she kept his medication on the middle shelf in a plastic bin marked with blue tape, and the word "Do Not Touch" in her neat block letters. Small systems, small protections, the kind that kept a family upright. Her brother Nico was 8, all elbows and cowlicks and dinosaur pajamas. He refused to retire, even in August. He hated fingersticks. Mia never rushed him. She counted with him 1 to 3 and let him squeeze her hand hard when the lancet clicked. Their mother, Elena, worked split shifts at Cedar Falls Laundry and came home smelling like detergent and steam, shoulders tight from lifting wet bundles. By the second week of August, Elena had started skipping dinner twice a week so the kids could eat fruit instead of canned soup. Mia noticed every skipped meal and pretended not to. She carried a folded paper in her fair apron pocket every day, worn soft at the creases from being opened and closed with hopeful hands. On it she had drawn, in pencil and purple pen, a map of the life she wanted: community college prerequisites, transfer options, vet tech certification, scholarships she had already circled and ranked. In the corner, she had sketched a German shepherd profile with intelligent ears and careful eyes. When she had enough quiet to dream for 60 seconds, she smoothed that page flat on her thigh and traced the lines with her thumbnail like she was checking a route before stepping off. The county fair gave her $11.25 an hour at the ticket booth near the Ferris wheel, plus 1 meal voucher for every 6-hour shift. It was not enough, but it was measurable, and measurable felt like power. She took extra shifts when other teens called out. She learned how to spot counterfeit 20s by touch. She kept a tiny notebook where she tracked exactly how much of each paycheck went to insulin, test strips, rent shortfall, bus passes, and the emergency envelope she hid in a flour tin above the stove. The envelope started at $9 and grew slowly to $93. People noticed her because she was polite. They trusted her because she remembered details adults forgot. Which kid was allergic to peanuts? Which vendor's generator coughed before failing? Which maintenance gate stuck in humidity unless you lifted and pushed together? She was the kind of person systems leaned on quietly, while pretending they did not. Lena Cruz had seen that on Mia's first day. Lena worked evening operations under the Hartwell Livestock Pavilion and took side assignments wherever schedules broke. service corridor checks, loading dock paperwork, vendor escort after midnight. 27, former Army medic, shoulders always squared as if still hearing cadence, she recognized competence the way mechanics recognized engine knock. Mia reminded her of younger soldiers who kept everyone else hydrated and never sat down until the work was done. Lena started leaving an extra granola bar at the ticket booth without comment. Mia started texting her when equipment did not match inventory sheets. The fare looked cheerful from above. String lights, fried dough, sugar in the air, country covers leaking from the main stage. But beneath the bright layer, the sublevel smelled like bleach, diesel, wet cardboard, and old concrete. Service doors had numbers painted over numbers. Locks had been changed so many times the frames looked patched and tired. And twice in 1 week, Mia saw things that did not fit. First was a transfer cart at 9:40 p.m., rolling out of a side freight elevator that should have been secured after livestock judging ended. 2 men in Hartwell Foundation windbreakers pushed it fast, heads down, no chatter. The cart was covered with a gray thermal blanket and tagged with a red quarantine placard, but the placard had no lot code, no date, no initials. Mia knew those forms because she processed visitor wristbands and read everything that crossed her sight line. Missing data felt like a siren to her. Second was a manifest sheet left half-fed into the copy machine by the quarantine office. She had gone in to return a lost radio and saw 3 pages with identical destination codes, each marked medical waste, each signed with the same looping B. Hartwell, each listing weights that were too low for equipment and too high for paperwork boxes. She was 14, not sworn law enforcement, but she was not careless. She took one phone photo, then another, when she noticed the hospital procurement account number in the bottom right corner. That night, she sent Lena a text with the image and a question. Why is Fair Quarantine billing through trauma intake? Lena answered 6 minutes later, don't ask here. Talk after shift. Maya typed back a thumbs up, then deleted it, and wrote, okay. She did not tell her mother, not yet. Elna carried enough already, and Mia had learned the family rule early. Bring home facts, not fear. On Thursday, with fireworks rehearsals popping over the livestock barns, Mia noticed a third detail. A white refrigerated trailer sat behind quarantine fencing, where no trailer had been scheduled. No vendor logo, no state seal, just a magnetic placard that read, Veterinary Biomaterial in plain black type, slightly crooked, as if applied in a hurry. The unit's generator ran too clean, almost silent, and diesel fumes drifted from an auxiliary tank strapped to the hitch with fresh ratchet ties. She saw Braden Hartwell talking to 2 deputies beside it, phone in one hand, sunglasses still on after dark because men like him wore status, even in shadows. He laughed at something one deputy said and clapped him on the shoulder like they were cousins. When Mia walked past with ticket rolls for late accounting, Braden looked directly at her badge, read her name, and smiled without warmth. Wrong corridor, kid, he said. Go sell your strips. She nodded and kept moving, pulse high but face neutral. At the service stair landing, she paused, opened her notebook, and wrote the trailer plate from memory. Then she texted Lena again. Saw unlisted reefer behind quarantine. Deputies with Braden. Plate starts 7KF. Lena called her instead of replying, voice low, controlled. Where are you right now? Stair B. Stay in public light. I'm coming up. Mia looked back once through the railing. The trailer was still there. Braden was not. She waited 9 minutes. Lena did not arrive. Later, they would learn why. A supervisor had diverted Lena to a false spill report 2 buildings over, a cleanup request filed from an internal extension that no one could trace afterward. At 10:17 p.m., As the lamb show wrapped and parents started drifting toward the fireworks lawn, Mia sent the line that would split Cedar Falls open. I found where they take them. No emoji, no second text. Her booth register balanced to the cent at 10:26. Her apron was found folded under the counter at 10:41, sketch page still inside, money envelope untouched. She did not clock out. By Friday morning, flyers were up, volunteers were searching creek paths and bus stops, and every mother in Cedar Falls had begun checking room doors twice before sleep. Lena gave a statement about the trailer and the unsigned quarantine logs. So did a janitor who had seen after-hours loading activity near the annex. A ride tech reported hearing a girl arguing near service stair B. 3 statements. Same zone. Same time window. By Saturday afternoon, all 3 witnesses had been told, politely and separately, that they were probably mixing up dates. That was where Braden Hartwell's power lived. Not just in money, but in the choreography of polite dismissal. Braden was 22, broad smile for donors, cold eyes when no cameras were rolling, heir to a surname turned into architecture. Hartwell Livestock Pavilion, Hartwell Trauma Wing, Hartwell Performing Arts, Scholarship Hall. The town did not merely know his family. It moved through their letters every day. His father, Colby Hartwell, built subdivisions on former orchard land, financed campaign mailers through 3 LLCs, and chaired the Fair Board's Public Safety Modernization Committee. His mother chaired the Hospital Foundation Gala and chose who sat at which table. Their names appeared on banners, plaques, and oversized checks. Their money sat under every civic photo op like poured concrete. When Mia vanished, Colby Hartwell arrived at the command post with catered coffee and private counsel before the first full search grid was complete. He spoke softly, hands open, sorrow calibrated. "We are praying for this child," he said where microphones could hear. Then he spoke off mic to the sheriff in a voice no camera caught and no one in town mistook. "Contain this." The first narrative came fast and clean. Mia had probably run away. Teenage stress, family pressure, maybe a boyfriend no one knew about. It was a template, and Cedar Falls had seen it before. 2 girls had disappeared after fair season in the prior 2 years. Both cases blurred into rumor within a month. Both families told to be patient and avoid online speculation. No bodies, no arrests. Just posters that faded in sun until rain peeled them down. Lena pushed back and found doors closing in sequence. Her written statement was logged without attachment photos. Her request to preserve loading dock camera footage was marked pending, then delayed, then returned with the note system malfunction between 2100 and 2300. She asked maintenance for access logs on the quarantine gate. The supervisor said records had been overwritten during software migration. She asked who authorized the migration during active search operations. He looked at the floor and said he did not know. He knew. He was afraid. Reed saw the pattern within 48 hours because he had watched different versions of it in other uniforms, other countries, other chains of command. He had taken overnight fair security for the noise and rhythm, for the way crowds gave his hypervigilance tasks to solve, but he still thought in terms of terrain denial and information control. Missing footage at critical choke points. Witnesses isolated and softened. Jurisdiction friction used as delay. He said little, listened hard, and started copying what he could still access. Shift logs, gate keycard failures, freezer fuel receipts that did not match declared trailer inventory. 3 days passed before state missing persons sent a liaison, and by then the local story had hardened around the word runaway. Braden helped harden it. He did not attend volunteer searches, but he appeared at exactly 2 press moments, once in a baseball cap and concern, once in a church parking lot, carrying bottled water for cameras. Off camera, he told fair workers to quit feeding panic. He told Lena, with a smile that never reached his eyes, that people who lied during investigations ended up unemployable in small towns. He told a teen volunteer that live streams could become defamation cases. And when anyone challenged him, he reached for the same shield. My father owns this county. The words were not literally true. They did not need to be. They only needed to feel true to cashiers, deputies, janitors, and temporary workers. One paycheck from eviction. Power in Cedar Falls moved through permits and favors, through board seats and donor dinners, through which calls got answered after midnight. Braden had grown up inside that weather system and mistook weather for destiny. He never understood the one category of man his family could not map. Someone who had already lost what mattered most, and therefore could not be bought with comfort or threatened with exclusion. By the first week of fair closing operations, Reed had stopped sleeping more than 90 minutes at a stretch, and Ghost had begun alerting on the quarantine route every time they passed it, ears forward, body locked, growl in his chest like remembered thunder. Reed filed each alert with timestamps and route coordinates, and each report disappeared into administrative review. Then Lena saw Braden at the loading dock with a wheeled cart and a limp sneaker under a thermal blanket, and she said no when no would cost her. Now the key turned in the quarantine lock, and every buried fact came rushing back to the corridor at once. The lock cylinder gave a dry metallic click, and Reed felt the sound all the way up his spine. His right hand stayed on the leash. His left settled between Ghost's shoulders, 2 fingers deep in the fur where the coat thickened over muscle and old scar tissue. The corridor noise thinned to essentials. Braden's hard breathing against concrete, Lena's damaged inhale, coolant lines ticking above cinder block, radio hiss from the deputy's shoulder mic. Reed had lived enough nights inside compressed seconds to know what came next would either confirm the pattern or bury it forever. He had spent 11 years in naval special warfare learning what buried truth smelled like. Before Cedar Falls, before the fair corridors and stage press conferences, before a county heir thought a chokehold was public relations, Reed Thompson was Petty Officer, First Class Thompson, call sign Reed, attached to an East Coast element that deployed so often he stopped unpacking his sea bags between rotations. He was 6 feet and broad through the chest from work that did not care about mirrors. Dark hair then, less gray at the temples. Scar fresh on his jaw from a steel hatch in rough seas. Knuckles ridged from doors and ladders and years of putting his hands where tools failed. He spoke little, because language was weight, and weight got people killed when used wrong. Nolan Price had been his opposite in all the ways that made teams hold together. Fast smile. Oklahoma drawl. A laugh that could cut through rotor noise and still feel human. JTAC qualified. Best eye on target handoff in their troop, and the one man who could read Reed's silence without guessing wrong. Nolan carried instant coffee packets in every pocket and gave them away to whoever looked worst at 0400. He had a daughter's crayon drawing laminated inside his plate carrier. Purple house, green dog, sun too big for the page. They deployed together 6 times. The 5th wrote itself into Reed's nervous system and never left. Yemen, compound breach, moonless and hot enough that dust stuck to sweat like wet plaster. They went in after midnight on an HVT package with local cutouts and bad maps. 2 assault elements, 1 EOD tech, 1 MWD team on alternate lane because the first route looked dirty in ISR. Reed was second man through the south wall charge. Nolan was 3 steps to his left, laser steady, voice clipped and calm in Reed's ear. They cleared 2 rooms clean, 1 stairwell ugly, 1 hallway with false doors and wires tucked where concrete met tile. Then the interior courtyard turned into noise and light. The detonation was not a movie fireball. It was pressure, dust, and a sound like a freight train inside bone. Secondary device, fragment spray. Nolan went down near the water tank with his right side open by steel and masonry. Reed remembered the exact color of the courtyard lamp over him, sodium yellow shaking in smoke. He remembered kneeling in rubble, both hands red-brown with dirt and blood and clotting agent, hearing himself call 9-line details into comms with a voice he did not recognize. Medevac delay, 19 minutes. Nolan lasted 13. Reed had watched pupils fix and chest motion stop while rotors were still a theory over the horizon. He stayed on Nolan's shoulder after the pulse was gone because he could not accept empty hands. Mission complete came over comms in someone else's voice. It sounded obscene. Back at the temporary strip, he cleaned Nolan's watch with bottled water and a torn T-shirt before handing it to command for transfer to next of kin. He had not slept a full night since. By the winter after Yemen, silence had become an incoming threat in his body. He could sleep in helicopter vibration, generator hum, and rain against Conex walls, but not in a suburban bedroom where the refrigerator clicked and then stopped. He woke every 90 minutes with his heart already sprinting. He mapped exits in church pews, movie theaters, grocery aisles, high school gymnasiums during community meetings. He sat with his back to walls. He learned every town by its choke points. Loud crowds calmed him because they produced pattern. Quiet rooms made him wait for impact. The Navy called it hypervigilance. The VA called it trauma response. Reed called it Tuesday. He did what operators do when language fails. He stayed useful. Instructor cycles, range safety blocks, security contracts that paid less than they should and asked fewer questions than they needed. He took overnight fare security in Cedar Falls because night shifts had structure, radios had check-ins, and crowds gave him moving grids to solve. If he kept counting, he did not have to remember that Nolan's daughter would outgrow the crayon house without him. Then he saw Ghost's file. Fort Sailor Disposition Center kept retired military working dogs in rows of chain-link runs under sodium lights that flattened color and turned breath white in winter. Reed went once to look, the way men said they would look when they knew they were already committed. A civilian contractor with tired eyes walked him past kennels and rattled names, ages, deployment histories. Most dogs barked and paced. One did not. Ghost stood in the back of Run 14, tan and black saddleback dulled by fluorescent light, left hind legs at half an inch off true. 9 years old, 5 deployments, decorated, needs experienced handler. He did not bark when Reed stopped. He watched. Ears forward, then a small tilt, assessing not affection, but intent. When Reed crouched, Ghost walked up, placed one paw against the chain link, and held it there without sound. Reed filed adoption paperwork that afternoon. The process punished patience. Liability waivers, behavioral transfer evaluations, housing verification, veterinary continuity plans, home inspections. Denial language written for people assumed to quit. 7 months of signatures and resubmissions, 1 lost packet, 1 administrative hold, 2 calls that never returned, and a final board review moved 3 times because someone at a desk did not mark a box. Reed kept copies of every form in a binder with color tabs like a mission brief. He showed up in person when email stalled. He called old command contacts for letters. He sat in parking lots after each delay and breathed through anger until his hands stopped shaking. When the approval came, it was a one-page notice with no ceremony. Pickup authorized. Ghost stepped into Reed's truck like he had been there before. They learned each other in fragments. Ghost slept by the bedroom door for 3 weeks and startled at trash truck hydraulics. Reed woke from dreams at 0213, 0247, 0319, and each time found a warm weight against his shins, steady breathing that pulled him back from rooms that no longer existed. Ghost refused slick tile until Reed laid runner mats through the hallway. Reed stopped drinking coffee after 1900 because Ghost paced when he smelled adrenaline and no mission. Neither fixed the other. They synchronized. Now, in the corridor under the pavilion, with a deputy's key still in the lock and Lena bruised against cinder block, Reed felt the old equation lock into place. Evidence mattered. Timing mattered. Control of fear mattered most. He heard Braden spit words into the floor. "You touch anything in there? You're finished." Reed did not look down at him. "You already finished yourself," he said. The deputy swallowed and pulled the key free, but did not open the door yet. Procedure warred with panic in his face. Lena stood with one palm on the wall and the other at her throat, eyes on Ghost because she had seen enough tonight to trust the dog over every badge in the corridor. Ghost's ears rotated forward. His body locked again. His alert dragged Reed into a second memory stream, this one written in fur and blast fragments and the bureaucracy that forgot heroes as soon as contracts ended. Ghost had entered service as MWDG 117, bred for drives that made handlers either proud or exhausted. He was all appetite as a young dog, appetite for command, for work, for scent puzzles that made other canines quit. His first handler, Staff Sergeant Eli Mercer, called him a four-legged lie detector with a demolition degree. Ghost deployed the first time at 18 months and never treated it like adventure. For him, work was order, and order was safety for the two legs, who moved slower than scent. 5 deployments made his resume and carved his body. Afghanistan, Helmand Approach Roads, 3 buried pressure plates found before sunrise patrols stepped onto them. 1 cache lane marked by Ghost, pawing at a patch of dirt no human eye had reason to distrust. 2 Marines alive because he refused to move forward and sat hard, alert set, gaze fixed. Syria border support, austere strip, fuel truck screen, accelerant trace flagged, secondary compartment discovered with detonator cord, and a trigger pack. Yemen transit compound. Ghost alerted on a wall that sounded solid, until breaching charge proved it hollow with 2 armed men inside. 23 lives saved, officially credited, though any handler would tell you official counts always ran low. He loved one thing more than search, finding his person after chaos. Eli would come back to Kennel Line's dusted gray, and Ghost would press his head to Eli's chest, exactly once before sitting for debrief, like a soldier waiting assignments. Loyalty as discipline. Kandahar took Eli first. Compound breach. Eastern District. Early dawn with rotor wash kicking sand into every seam. Ghost and Eli were on lead for tunnel sweep after assault cleared first structure. The Taliban had seeded the approach lane with shrapnel sleeves in low masonry, meant to maim whatever searched low and fast. Blast came from the right wall, not underfoot. Eli took fragment impacts through vest gap and neck. Ghost took steel through the left hip and flank, spun, recovered, and still dragged himself back toward Eli, under fire, until another operator hauled both behind cover. Eli died on the med table. Ghost survived surgery and 3 more procedures, then months of rehab that taught him to trust the leg again without ever restoring full range. After that, Ghost worked with a second handler through 2 shorter deployments. Slower gait, but same nose, same refusal to false alert. He retired with citations and a limp, then sat in a disposition kennel while paperwork decided whether his years had been an asset or a line item. 3 years off active duty had grayed his muzzle and stiffened cold mornings. They had not dulled the algorithm in his head. Scent layers still separated for him in fractions. Antiseptic versus bleach, fear sweat versus exertion sweat, diesel fresh run versus cooled residue, sedative compounds masked under veterinary disinfectant. In Cedar Falls, he had tracked Mia's thread, where official dogs washed out in carnival overlap, because Ghost ignored noise and hunted anomalies. Rex, one of the state K-9S, had circled the midway and lost signal in popcorn grease and trampled hay. Ghost had walked the same path, paused at Service Stair B, then pulled hard downwind toward quarantine fencing, and sat at a seam in concrete where cold air leaked from below. Reed logged the coordinates. Administrative Review filed it away. Ghost repeated the alert the next night, and the next. Rex was not wrong. Rex was overwhelmed by command pressure, bad scene control, and handlers ordered to clear public zones quickly. Ghost was retired, unofficial, and therefore harder to steer away from inconvenient truth. In the corridor, with 32 witnesses now breathing in sync with fear, Ghost pawed once at the threshold and gave a short bark that carried a single message to his handler. Source confirmed. Immediate action. Lena whispered through pain. He's been doing that for days, hasn't he? Reed nodded once. Every pass. A fair worker answered from behind them, voice shaking. They told us he was old. They said he was reacting to feed disinfectant. Ghost barked again and pressed his nose to the crack under the steel, whining now, a thin sound that made even the deputy flinch. He doesn't do theater, Reed said. That was the part Cedar Falls had never understood about working dogs and the men who trusted them. They did not care about donors, press statements, or family names on buildings. They cared about signal. They followed it until it ended in a person, an explosive, a body, or a lie. The deputy's hand hovered over the latch, then withdrew, then returned. Sweat ran from his temple to his collar, despite the cold draft rolling under the quarantine door. Braden tried one more time from the floor, voice breaking at the edges. You open that, and my father will bury all of you. No one answered him. Ghost stood braced on his front line like a drawn blade, old injury forgotten in the pull toward purpose, and Reed felt the familiar steadiness settle in his chest. The one thing stronger than grief. Mission clarity. Find, confirm, protect. The latch began to turn. The latch rolled fully. The seal broke, and a blade of refrigerated air cut through the corridor hard enough to sting lungs already raw from panic. Ghost surged into the opening with controlled force, claws skidding once on painted concrete, before catching, nose high, then low, then high again as he sorted layers. Antiseptic, diesel, wet metal. Human fear baked into cloth and plastic. Reed let him take line, but not distance, stepping through the threshold with his shoulder angled to keep sight on both the annex bay and the corridor behind him. The deputy stayed at the doorframe, radio in one hand, keys still clenched in the other, like he had not decided which life he wanted to keep. Inside, the quarantine annex was bigger than it looked on paper, a long concrete chamber divided by chain-link partitions and white poly curtains stamped with biohazard symbols. Half the overhead lights were dead. The ones still working flickered in irregular pulses that made every shadow look like movement. Along the left wall sat stacked crates of veterinary disposables, shrink-wrapped and tagged. Along the right, 3 rolling stainless tables, one tipped on its side, one clean, one marked with a dark smear that looked like iodine dragged by a sleeve. Straight ahead, behind inner fencing, the white refrigerated trailer idled with a low mechanical hum, exhaust feathering from the auxiliary unit in slow gray ribbons. Lena stepped in 2 paces behind Reed and stopped dead, hand back at her bruised throat. "That's it," she whispered. Her voice came out shredded but certain. Same trailer. 32 witnesses had watched her choke. 9 followed through the doorway now, pulled by momentum and shame and the possibility that silence could still be reversed. At the annex entry, Reed had transferred Braden to a visible restraint chain before advancing. Deputy locked on Braden's right wrist, while the ride tech pinned shoulder and hips with a knee planted. It held for the moment only because both stayed fully committed to the weight. The teen with the live stream moved to the side for a clean angle, camera shaking but steady enough to read the placards. No one pretended this was routine anymore. Ghost's ears rotated forward, his body locked. A growl rolled in his chest, low and continuous. Reed recognized the pattern from Breached Nights and Buried Rooms. Not confusion, not aggression, source acquisition with human proximity. He gave one short command: "Seek." Ghost drove right, then cut left, nose dragging along the base of the chain link, ignoring the open tables and heading for the trailer's rear corner where frost had crusted around the gasket seam. He barked once, scratched twice, barked again, sharper now, and planted himself with his shoulder pressed to the metal. Reed moved to him fast, gloved fingers brushing the trailer latch. Cold burned through fabric. A numbered tamper seal hung from the handle, clipped but not logged, tag blank where a supervisor's signature should have been. He looked over his shoulder at the deputy. "Photograph this." The deputy stared for half a beat, then fumbled his phone out and snapped 3 shots, flash bouncing off white paint. His radio crackled at his collar. Dispatch said units were 3 minutes out, state investigator notified, EMS en route from trauma intake. He repeated it back in a clipped monotone and sounded like a man hearing his own voice from far away. Reed crouched beside Ghost and scanned the ground. Tire tracks over old oil stains, fresh drag marks ending at the rear doors, a broken zip tie near the drain channel. Another 2 feet away, half under a pallet jack wheel, Lena saw them and sucked in air through her teeth. "She had white ties on her wrists when he moved the cart," she said. "I saw it when the blanket shifted." Reed pointed without looking up. "Bag those! Don't touch by hand." A concessions worker surprised himself by moving first. He grabbed a box of nitrile gloves from a crate, tore it open with shaking fingers, and handed pairs down the line to the janitor and 1 livestock handler. The same people who had frozen in the corridor now crouched around evidence markers made from folded receipt paper, voices low, careful, trying to repair what fear had cost. From outside the annex, Braden shouted, "You are all committing felonies in a restricted zone." No one turned toward him. By 11:07 p.m., the fireworks over the fairgrounds had ended, and the muffled cheers from the midway were gone, leaving only the refrigeration unit, the radio hiss, and Braden's voice cracking against concrete. Reed tested the trailer latch again. Locked. Secondary padlock on the lower hasp, newer than the mount, brass still bright. Ghost whined and drove his nose under the right door seam so hard his whiskers flattened. Then he pawed at one exact spot and looked back at Reed, eyes bright, fixed, impatient with human delay. "Deputy," Reed said. "Who has this key?" The deputy swallowed. "Quarantine supervisor. Maybe fair operations. Maybe Hartwell admin. Call all 3. He keyed his mic. No response from quarantine supervisor. Operations sent voicemail. Hartwell admin picked up, heard location, and disconnected without a word. Lena laughed once, a short, painful sound with no humor in it. Funny how phones die when doors open. Reed rose and scanned the ceiling corners. 2 camera domes, one pointed at the entrance, one at the loading lane, both dark. He stepped to a wall panel, opened it with a coin, and found the recording lines clipped clean with insulated cutters. Not chewed, not corroded. Cut. He held up the severed wire for the phone's filming. "Get this on record." The teen live streamer whispered, "Got it." Behind them in the corridor, something changed in the cadence of Braden's protests. Less outrage, more calculation. The ride tech glanced over his shoulder one time too many, distracted by the trailer. That was enough. Braden twisted under him, drove an elbow backward, slipped the grip, and slammed into the annex doorway at a run. "Move!" he shouted, shoving the deputy hard enough to bang him against the frame. Keys flew, clattering under a stainless table. He came straight for Lena. She had one hand on the chain link and one at her throat, still recovering balance when he reached her. His fingers hooked the front of her vest and jerked her sideways toward him, using her body as cover between himself and Reed. She hit the fence with a metal rattle that rang down the chamber. The live stream camera swung wildly. Someone screamed. The janitor dropped a glove packet and backed into stacked crates. Braden's face had lost its donor smile polish. Sweat streaked his hairline. Dust and mop water marked his jacket. His eyes were wide now, not with shame, with exposure. "Tell them it's staged," he hissed at Lena, forearm jammed across her clavicle. "Tell them he planted this." Reed stopped 3 steps away, square and still, breathing even. Ghost moved before command, rising onto his front line, body between Reed and Braden, muzzle aimed at Braden's hip, growl climbing by degrees, old injury forgotten, work mode absolute. "Step back," Reed said. 2 words. Quiet, final. Braden barked a laugh that died halfway out. "Do you know who you're touching? My father funds the trauma wing. Sheriff Conway takes our calls before first ring. You're a rent-a-cop in a costume." Reed did not blink. "Release her." Braden tightened his hold, trying to pull Lena toward the trailer doors. "You don't give orders here." Ghost's ears pinned forward. His chest vibrated with a deep warning that made the chain link tremble under Lena's shoulder. Reed's right hand hovered open near the leash clip, not grabbing, not flinching, giving the dog room to commit if the line was crossed. Lena felt Braden's grip shake, not from strength, from adrenaline slipping into fear. She could feel his pulse hammering through his forearm. She looked at Reed and saw what Braden was finally seeing. Not anger, not performance, not a man trying to win an argument in front of a crowd. A man already at the end of the decision tree, with every branch mapped and no uncertainty left in him. Braden had spent 22 years reading hesitation and mistaking it for surrender. He looked into Reed's eyes and found neither. For a second he tried one more mask, voice dropping into practiced contempt. "You heard me. This county buries you." Reed's answer was 3 words. "You're outnumbered now." It landed because it was true in more ways than Braden could solve quickly. Not just bodies in the room. Cameras, call logs, severed wires, dispatched traffic. A deputy who had finally keyed state notification on an open channel. A concessions manager who had started picking up zip ties with gloved hands. A live stream with comments climbing by the second from people outside Cedar Falls who had no reason to protect the Hartwell name. Braden's gaze flicked left to the doorway, right to the trailer, down to Ghost's teeth, then back to Reed. The room saw the moment happen. Entitlement recalculating in real time. The first thin crack in a man who had never had to absorb consequence. He shoved Lena forward, not hard enough to drop her, just enough to clear his lane, and lunged for the trailer latch as if he could still erase what it held. Ghost launched with controlled precision, not at the throat, at the forearm. Teeth closed on jacket sleeve and flesh beneath, pressure calibrated by training and repetition, enough to stop motion, not maul. Braden yelled and swung with his free hand. Ghost held and drove him sideways into the chain link with a metallic crash that shook dust from the rafters. Reed stepped in, stripped Braden's wrist off the latch, and rotated him down in one tight movement. Knee to concrete, wrist pinned, shoulder locked. Braden hit hard and cursed into the floor, trying to buck free, but the leverage was gone, and so was his leverage in the room. "Cuff him," Reed said. The deputy hesitated one heartbeat, then dropped to a knee and pulled steel from his belt. The first bracelet clicked shut over Braden's right wrist, with a sound cleaner than any speech that night. Braden twisted, trying to look back at the phones, at Lena, at anyone. "You can't do this," he shouted. "Call my father." A bystander near the doorway answered from 2 feet away, voice flat with late-arriving courage. "We already called someone better." The second cuff clicked. Ghost released on command and stepped back to Reed's left leg, chest heaving, ears still forward, eyes locked on Braden in case the fight restarted. Reed rested one hand on the dog's neck, feeling the heat of him, the tremor in old muscles, asked to work like younger ones. "Good," he said quietly. Braden lifted his head as far as the cuffs allowed and looked straight at Reed again. The fury was still there, but under it now sat something new and unfamiliar on his face. Recognition. He had not been stopped by a rival family, or bargained with by a board member, or buffered by a private attorney before sunrise. He had been stopped by a man and a dog who did not care whose name was on the building. Outside, sirens began to build, faint at first, then sharper as they entered the fairgrounds. Inside, with Braden restrained and cameras rolling, Reed took the recovered keys from under the stainless table, chose the smallest brass cut that matched the padlock brand, and turned back to the trailer while Ghost set his paws and watched the seam, as if the entire county's conscience was waiting on the other side. Reed slid the brass key into the padlock, felt one stubborn catch, then a clean turn, and when he pulled the trailer handle, the doors opened on a wave of freezer air and the faint medicinal smell of ketamine cut with antiseptic. Mia Alvarez lay on a gurney rail in the right bay, wrists cinched with white zip ties, ankles bound looser, thermal blanket thrown over her like cargo instead of a child. Her lips were pale, her breath came shallow but regular. An IV line hung from a portable stand clamped to the wall, half-empty bag labeled with veterinary stock numbers, not hospital issue. Ghost's bark cracked across the annex and then dropped to a whine as he planted both front paws at the trailer lip and stretched his nose toward Mia's hand. "She's alive," Lena rasped, and the words broke on her bruised throat. The deputy at the door found his voice and shouted into his radio, "Confirmed juvenile, breathing, immediate hypothermia protocol. Send EMS straight to quarantine annex now." His tone changed with that sentence. Procedure replaced posture. He moved to the trailer, took out his cuffs key with shaking fingers, and looked at Reed for permission before cutting the ties with a trauma shear from his own belt. Reed nodded once. The severed zip ties dropped into a clean evidence bag held open by the janitor in fresh nitrile gloves, hands trembling but steady enough to keep chain of custody intact. Ghost shifted left and froze again, ears forward, eyes on the trailer's inner wall. Reed followed the line of the dog's stare and found a second compartment behind stacked coolers labeled Vaccine Transport. Inside sat 3 banker boxes, one encrypted tablet still powered, and a clipboard packet clipped in red. The top manifest carried the Hartwell Foundation letterhead, the same looping B. Hartwell signature Lena had photographed, and transport lines billed to hospital procurement accounts with coded juvenile transfer entries routed through shell companies Reed recognized from copied fare logs. He handed the packet to the deputy without looking away from the box contents. Photograph, then seal. Every page. By 11:19 p.m., EMS rolled in with warmed saline, monitors, and 2 trauma blankets, and the lead medic stopped cold when she saw the trailer interior. "Who authorized this setup?" she asked. "No authorized chain," Reed said. "Document everything." They loaded Mia in practiced silence, core temp low, pulse thready but climbing, pupils reactive. When the medic asked her name, Mia's eyelids fluttered but did not open. Lena touched the rail with 2 fingers and whispered, "You're safe now." Voice sandpaper raw and still fierce. Behind them, Braden started shouting again as county units arrived, then state investigators, then a prosecutor from outside jurisdiction whose first instruction was simple and devastating. "Local sheriff's office is recused from command pending conflict review. Scene control transfers now." Sheriff Conway came through the annex doors 2 minutes later, with Colby Hartwell and private counsel at his shoulder, coat still buttoned, expression rehearsed for cameras that were no longer on his side. "This is a restricted facility," Colby said. "You have no authority to seize private records without—" The state prosecutor cut him off and held up a phone. Lena's live stream filled the screen, Braden's hand crushing her throat, his voice saying, "My father owns this county." Reed's warning, the struggle, the annex entry. "Probable cause is established on live video corroborated by physical evidence and a recovered minor," she said. "Your family name is now part of the evidence index, not an exemption from it." Conway reached for command by reflex. "We can handle this locally." "No," she said. "You won't?" State techs marked and bagged every item that had been named in that corridor of excuses. 2 white zip ties from the floor drain channel. The clipped tamper seal photographed in place, then sealed. The severed camera lines from the wall panel. The brass padlock and key set. The cooling unit, GPS module, pulled from the trailer hitch housing. The clipboard manifests and procurement ledgers. Each item got a number, a timestamp, and a witness signature. Dale Wyrick, the man who had stared at a soda inventory while Lena couldn't breathe, stepped forward and signed 3 forms with a shaking hand after giving a recorded statement that Braden had ordered him to keep workers facing away from the quarantine hall if anything got loud. He cried once while he spoke, then kept talking. The missing thread from Part 3 snapped into place at 12:03 a.m. when Operations voicemail was finally returned on speaker in the annex command corner. Quarantine Supervisor Marla Kent said she had ignored dispatch because Colby Hartwell told her any call after 10 came through counsel first. A state investigator asked about the false spill report that pulled Lena off Stair B. Marla gave them the originating extension from memory. Techs matched it in minutes to a Hartwell admin desk line on the pavilion mezzanine. Call placed by Braden's assistant using a staff code she admitted he had demanded earlier that night. She stared at the floor and said, "I knew it was wrong." She never had a second sentence. She didn't need one. At 12:27 a.m., the trailer GPS extraction rendered on a laptop. 3 years of route history, archived in a maintenance cloud account no one had scrubbed. Repeated late-night runs from the quarantine annex to 2 Hartwell-owned properties and 1 shuttered medical storage site outside Cedar Falls. Overlay with missing person timestamps lit the screen like a wound. Every so-called runaway from the past 2 fair seasons vanished within 80 yards of Hartwell-controlled service corridors. Same timing window, same root spine, same refrigerated unit signature. Conway saw the map and took one step back, then another, and said nothing else for the rest of the night. By 1:10 a.m., arrest paperwork expanded from Braden to conspiracy and evidence tampering counts that included Colby's authorization chain, Marla's compliance, and 2 deputies who had buried reports. The deputy who had hesitated in the corridor gave a full recorded statement at 1:22 a.m., including his admitted delay and why he had delayed. It did not spare him. It did preserve the timeline. His moonlighting badge cam, inactive by policy, stayed inactive. The prosecutor noted that failure in the file as abandoned evidence and moved on. At 2:41 a.m., in the trauma intake corridor under hard fluorescent light and burnt coffee smell, the second half of the story finally exhaled. Elena Alvarez reached her daughter's gurney at a run that ended in a collapse to her knees beside the rail, both hands on Mia's face, whispering in Spanish and English, prayer and apology tangled together. Nico stood 2 steps behind in a hoodie over dinosaur pajamas, clutching a plastic stegosaurus so hard his knuckles blanched, eyes wide but dry in the way children go dry when they are beyond tears. Lena stood nearby with a soft neck brace and bruises blooming purple, one hand still unconsciously touching the place Braden's fingers had been, watching the Alvarez family hold each other like gravity had returned. Mia stirred as warming blankets hissed, her eyes open to a slit. The nurse leaned close. "You're at county trauma. You're safe. Do you know who's here?" Mia's lips moved. No sound came first. Then a whisper, thin as thread. "Ghost." The old dog lifted his head from where he had been lying at Reed's boot and stepped forward on that stiff left hip, slow but certain. Reed loosened the leash, and Ghost placed his muzzle against the mattress edge until Mia's fingers found the fur between his ears. She didn't have strength to grip. She only rested her hand there. Ghost closed his eyes and held still as stone. Then he turned and pressed his head into Reed's chest. Exactly once, the way working dogs do when the objective is complete, and all the adrenaline has somewhere to go. Reed's hand settled on Ghost's neck and stayed there longer than command required. He looked down at the dog, then across to Lena, then to Elena and Nico around Mia's bed, and for the first time that night his shoulders dropped half an inch. At 3:06 a.m., the state investigator walked over with a printed map and set it on the counter between Reed and Lena. Colored pins marked 5 disappearances, all clustered around Hartwell service infrastructure. 2 names had been tagged as prior runaways and quietly closed. She tapped both with her pen. "Not runaways. We executed warrants on the storage site from the GPS route 30 minutes ago. Both girls recovered alive. Transporting now. Their parents have been notified." Lena shut her eyes and let out a breath that sounded like pain leaving by force. The investigator nodded toward Ghost. "Your dog gave us the lane nobody wanted." "Not my lane," Reed said, scratching behind Ghost's ear. "His." Dawn came gray through the trauma corridor glass. Outside, crews were already unbolting Hartwell signage from annex doors under state order, while evidence vans idled where donor cars usually parked. Inside, every collected item from the night sat logged, sealed, and signed in transfer bins waiting for lab intake. Every call had a callback or a refusal noted on record. Every silence that had protected Braden now had a timestamp next to it. Mia slept, hands still tangled lightly in Ghost's fur, while Elena held her other hand, and Nico leaned against the rail, whispering dinosaur facts he had saved for when she woke up. Cedar Falls would spend years admitting what it had permitted. But that morning, one truth was already settled in concrete, and paperwork and breath. A retired military dog had tracked a missing girl through a wall of money, and once he found her, the wall did not stand.